All right, everyone. So welcome to those of you just joining us. Today, our topic is applying the science of learning to large lecture classes. And so we're going to build on the series we've been running this fall. And we're going to build on the idea that, while faculty have always said that students today are different, I remember my first time in a faculty role. Actually, I think this is the faculty development role. And we won't say how many decades ago this was, but an older faculty member came to me and said, students are different these days. They're not doing the reading. And I was trying to think back, students have always not done the reading. What's different? And yet now we are seeing real differences in this current generation coming of age. We're seeing physiological changes in the students we're encountering. For most of the students in college today, during their developmental stages, they've had exposure to screens, social media use, the pandemic, during formative years, anxiety about climate change and global social unrest, um, local politics, division, all of that is coming in. And so we're seeing an impact of this on students in our classroom. And so while everything we're going to talk about from the learning science is evergreen and eternal, it also is particularly important, and we're pitching it to the fact that we are seeing impacts on the students in our classroom in terms of their cognitive development. Extended screen time and sleep deprivation are creating physical changes in their brain that affect reasoning, impulse control, problem solving, emotional regulation. There are studies that show the anatomy of students' brains showing neural disorganization and thinning of the dura in the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for crucial functions like reasoning, problem solving, impulse control, and emotional regulation. So we have this cognitive development, but then there are two other forms of this too happening. There's the mental health aspect of it, which we're seeing. I mean, we've been talking about mental health at Tufts for many years now, but we're also seeing more and more these impacts. Current events, climate uncertainty, geopolitical instability are contributing to increased anxiety, impacting focus and retention for students. When you're in a very anxious state, it's really hard to focus and to integrate new things into your learning. And then the third tenet is social skills. So from pandemic experiences, social media use, and students are having difficulty in handling interpersonal interactions and conflict. And so I kind of want to start with a survey, and I'm going to put the poll in the chat. And I want to know, does this data resonate with what you're seeing as you come in here? And I'm giving you a little survey there. Please feel free to skip the responses. You don't need to register, sorry, skip registering. And if you follow that link, you'll be able to fill out the survey. Let me know if anybody has trouble with it. And for those of you just joining, Dan, I'm going to assume you're sharing the handout in the chat. Thanks.
I think I'm up to date with everyone who's come into the room. So I think if you don't have it access, let me know. But I think I kept putting it in enough in the
That's
chat.
great. I see 10 surveys completed and 13 still underway. So I'm just going to give folks a minute to fill that out. But I am going to share my screen. Well, I share my screen to share it in full view. You see my whole screen, don't you? Nope, my screen sharing is paused.
We can see in that you started it, but we can't actually see what you're projecting. It's just a black screen right now.
Do you see the poll?
No.
No, it says paused. I have not had this happen before. Stop share. I always tell folks I'm doing this on purpose to model what happens when technology doesn't work. All right. I'm gonna just not try to make it full and share. So can you all see this even though you see the things around it? It wasn't working in the present mode. Now is it sharing? Awesome. All right, so I think this is great. We're getting a mix of responses around whether or not this resonates with you, the mental health burden. Some people are agreeing, some people are thinking maybe some of it, not all of it. And then let's look at the responses here. If so, when we observe students in our large lecture courses struggling to maintain focus, retaining or applying learning and interacting with peers, what behaviors are we noticing? Let's see what behaviors folks are noticing. So we see folks' attention in different places, looking into space, devices, phones, the heightened anxiety, inactivity appearing checked out, right? A lot of body language, eye contact, tired. I think we can all feel that. And not remembering what they've done in prerequisite courses. Oh, I'm so happy there's a course where it's been incredible. Multitasking and sometimes missing out. All right, thank you, everyone. I'm just looking at the chat and seeing what folks are saying. All right, so if we think about this, the struggles that we're facing, whether or not the entire data that I was producing resonated with you and your students, we're going to pull on two different themes approaches to supporting students' learning and how we might implement them within a large lecture course. So we're going to do things today to try to model some of them. And then we're going to focus on building community and then maintaining students' attention and focus. And this connects to helping our students at all stages become more effective learners on their own within our discipline. And I really appreciate the fact that folks are saying there are also students who are very engaged. And Sergey, I love how you're describing motivated, curious, hardworking, high-achieving students. We have all of that at Tufts as well. All right, so the first part we're going to talk about is why community. In our second session, we explored how productive learning requires moving to a learning edge, sometimes called a zone of proximal development, and a sense of community and social interactions with peers in the course can help students persist through discomfort. It can also motivate them to learn. And so we're going to think about this community. As James Lang writes in the book Distracted, we are built to pay attention to other human beings, whether we're using the cerebral machinery dedicated to recognize individual faces or managing a complex web of relationships that we form through our social media accounts. So that idea of really building on that social connection and leveraging that. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go into breakouts. I'm going to make some breakout rooms for everyone. And I'm going to ask you in these small groups of 3 to 4 to think about ways that you build community in your classes. So most of us here have fairly large lectures and we'll think about ways that you currently build community in your chat. So introduce yourselves in your rooms when they open, share ideas around ways you build community. And then when we come back together, we're going to ask folks to share some of the ideas you generated in the chat. Any questions before I open the rooms? All right. Welcome back, everyone. I thought this might be a nice time to kind of share. So I'm going to invite you to share in the chat or unmute yourself and speak out loud. Themes that you noticed in your discussions. So what were some of the ideas that you thought were really useful that you heard in your breakout rooms about how you build community in your large lecture classes?
I'll pop it in the chat. But we had kind of a mixture of different types of programs. So we had a couple folks who were working with the online DPT program. And that was really interesting to hear how they can collect information kind of from the applications from the cohorts in order to create connection pods of people that have similar interests and strengths and what they want to get out of mentoring relationships and where they're physically located. For me and Nadine, both kind of having in-person larger classes, we talked about even just like using engagement in class to give students a chance to work with folks around them, even if they might be different people that they're sitting with every time. And then for my class, I also try to build kind of outside of the class engagement groups for case study assignments. And I try to group those based on, the academic year, whether or not they have various background, courses and things like that, so that they're kind of all at the same level. They might have similar career interests. And hopefully they find a study partner within that as well.
Thank you, Lauren. What about other breakout rooms? What sorts of themes did folks have for creating community or ideas?
I'll go ahead and share from our group. So two of us are from the PT program in Seattle. So online hybrid program, which has its unique characteristics. And we're doing kind of some of the similar things that was already discussed. But one of the kind of, I think, themes, my perspective anyway, is the use of small group breakouts, where students feel a little bit more comfortable maybe speaking up, sharing in a smaller group rather than a large class size. So that was in developing community through that and getting to know at least a few students. In our program, we keep our academic groups, the small groups of students, consistent. We also use a coaching model instead of a traditional academic advising model. We actually start out with meetings with our coachee groups, so that's another way for students to get to meet other students in the program. And then because it's a cohort and they're grad students, they just kind of naturally form connections outside of, I think, what we're even aware of using social media and so forth, even prior to when they join the program. And we have students actually all the way from the East Coast to Guam, which is also kind of interesting.
Yeah, I see that small group, and I like, Tom, what you're saying about basis of links that are outside the course material. Do you want to say more about that, the small group connections, how you build them? Because that's really interesting.
So that did not come from me.
That's
That came
okay.
from,
You're sharing out your groups.
yeah, no, that was something that I think Ellen Patterson mentioned that she does in her class, that she brings the together in groups that are smaller than the full class, and then works on to helps them build connections using connections that aren't based on at all on what they're covering in the class, which I think is a good idea. And I'm guessing there are ways of making that happen, even virtually.
I used Padlet and set up prompts for students, encourage them. Not everyone did, but lots of people uploaded videos and photographs of their interests and their lives before dental school and what they love to do outside. And then then showed them how you can like create and bring them back to that when they do their small group assignments, to look at like really go back now to that Padlet and look at the people that are in your group and that you're working with. And I mean, I can't give you a report out yet on how effective it is, but it's a cool tool to use for that.
When I taught a course that had, I think it was 170 students, this was at Yale. So the student's house, their dorm, was where they eat, slept. Like there was a much bigger tie to that than say dorms at Tufts. But I used to have students the first day of class try to find at least 2 other people who lived in their dorm, so who lived near them on campus, and then see if you guys could work and do homework together. And I thought that physical co-location, obviously you can't do that if you're in the DPT program, right? Maybe you can. Maybe if 2 people are in Boston or 2 people are in, New Delhi, they can connect with each other with that physical location. I see a lot of group examples here, getting students to talk to each other, whether through Padlet or online or working on a project, but really engage and interact directly with each other. And that's great. I think that's really important, especially if students feel lost in a larger class environment. I had 2 other ideas that I was gonna sort of plant in, and these come from James Lang's book, Distracted, as well. The first one is the value affirmation activity, which we do as part of the course design. Has anybody here ever done one or seen one, the values affirmation activity? So the idea with these, and if you wanted to see what one looks like, I just made a sample Google Doc version. So hopefully you can just see the form. You don't need to fill it out. But the idea is that you're thinking about what matters to you. And I first encountered these, they did a bunch of studies in intro physics classes 15 years ago, maybe, where they were looking at differential performance on exams. And they showed this as one way to let students, like, even though it wasn't related to the physics content, it improves students' performance, students who are feeling uncertain, insecure, maybe some threat, like I'm not going to perform well. Just being able to do this activity helps calm them down and more equivalent across groups, the exam performance, because you had this boost of, oh, these values are what matter to me in the world, and that's being recognized here in the classroom. Again, it's very different from having students start to talk to each other, but it's another way to show that who you are as a whole human being, who you are bringing yourself, your values into this classroom matter. So that's an example of an activity, and it's something you can do in any size classroom. The example I put, you click them, so you could even show how many people have similar values to you back to the whole class. The free write about why the values are important to you, maybe you don't have time to actually see that from every student, maybe you don't share that back. So students' answers aren't being shared with each other, but even just being given the space and the idea that they can communicate that. And then the second idea is the idea of breaking the plane. James Lang talked about this. Oh, Helen, go ahead.
Sorry, I just thought I really liked that values affirmation activity you showed, and I was just curious if you feel like there could be value in using that as a tool, maybe to help create groups, or I assume it would be good for a group to have aligned values. Like maybe maybe it's also kind of nice to be paired with someone that you're different with different values. I don't know. I just was thinking I'd see what you thought about that.
I think that's a great idea.
Can I?
And go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to unmute. Sorry.
Oh, I thought you were going to say something very beautiful, and Dana asked and bringing in the social worker about how great an idea
I could
was.
say something, but honestly, in that moment, it was really just. I was thinking, though, actually, when I wasn't sort of saying something that had actually no words, but just a sound attached to it, was that one of the nice things about this is that at times, particularly if you're experiencing any sort of tensions in your classes, if there's ideological differences or the ways in which different challenges can manifest, coming back to something like this, which shows, regardless, when you strip away certain things that define us or create differences, there are lots of ways in which these values affirmations connect people. And so it's another way to kind of remind or signal to the class that that you're all whole human beings, and there's so much more to you than just your major or, you know, a particular way of a worldview, and that these other values you may have in common. So I think from a social emotional perspective, this can serve so many different functions. And so I think, Helen, you're absolutely right. I think it's a great way to either mix people up or actually create even deeper connections through shared value. Yeah. All right, that's it. I'm going to mute myself again for real.
Any other questions about value affirmations or thoughts? The other different way to build community, and again, it's not as intuitive, but James Lange talks about this idea of breaking the plane. And this is very rooted in the physical environment, but I could imagine you could translate this into online environments where you're working with students in smaller groups or meeting with them one-on-one, or moving into breakout rooms, I don't know. But from the first day of class, thinking about this physical space of your classroom and this differential between you on a stage at a lecture podium, maybe you're there because the microphone, and you know, thinking about that for breaking that, like, can you move into the space in which students are sitting? Are there opportunities for informal conversations as students arrive, right? Like when they're coming, do some students come early and sit down? You can, oftentimes we're in our head, we're trying to make sure the tech works, we're setting everything up, but if there's a moment to kind of gather and start to get to know them one-on-one, you can even do that in a classroom online if you open the space early for people to greet each other. And you can also do this while students are working, informally check in with students. If a student asks a question, you can physically approach them, you know, make eye contact as you listen and respond. If you're always getting questions from the same students in the same place of the classroom, you can ask, are there any questions in the back of the classroom? Are there any questions on the left side of the classroom? And physically move into that space to look at the students in the eyes and see if you can get other students to speak up. And that's sort of the idea around deliberately standing near different groups of students while they're engaged in discussions or problem solving or any of that small group you were discussing. Can you move into that space? Any questions about that idea? Or thoughts about how you might adapt that into your online environment?
Great. Why is it called breaking the plane? Sorry. It will help me remember if I understand why.
James Lange was describing, if I remember this, because I went back and read it a couple weeks ago, but he was describing like there's this imaginary plane in between the podium and the rest of the classroom. And some of them were actually physically set up during COVID where you had this clear glass.
Got it.
So that's why I was
Okay.
breaking that plane.
Okay,
Amy?
thanks.
Like a stage.
I was just going to share an idea about how I do that in the online environment. I start the online classes with a pre-class song. And so I log in about 10 minutes beforehand, and it's just, and I pick it based on the theme. You know, if it's, you know, like I like to move it in its physical activity, or if it's happy, don't worry, be happy. Like if it's upcoming exam, whatever, I'll try to choose a song. Sometimes it's instrumental that fits the theme of the class. And I play that at the beginning, and then I post why I chose that song, kind of as like a little bit of a conversation point, and put that in there. So it kind of gives something light to kind of begin to discuss. Someone might say, oh, I love that song. Or, you know, it also would be a great song for the theme today. So people just kind of start to talk and kind of help set the tone, but it gives people that space to kind of realize that I'm not kind of like behind the podium. My camera isn't off right until the top of the hour kind of thing. So starting with that is kind of could be a potential online way to do that, where you're kind of just opening that space a few minutes beforehand. But I've also done that in-person classes too, where I've had the theme song and you just play a little clip of it. And then I have that listed in Canvas so the students know the songs, so they see that ahead of time as well. So it's in the agenda for the day, but you could do it online or in person.
Yeah, I do a song before every class as well, Amy, but I don't do the little Canvas post or whatever about what it is, which I'm totally starting now. But like tomorrow we're talking about the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs, and I'm playing It's the End of the World as You Know It. So, but I love the idea of like having that be like written or somewhere for them to find.
And not a shooting star is not a star from They Might Be Giants. Nadine, sorry.
I do like the idea of a song, Amy. Hi, Amy. I'm gonna try that with my class because I try to get there early, so I think that will help as well, calm them down. But I wanted to say, Carie, to your point about these little things where you're walking towards them, even if it's a bigger classroom or approaching them and things like that. I've had students actually thank me for that. I thought they're like little things, but I feel like these little things go a long way. So it doesn't all have to be big stuff, but doing the little stuff consistently, I think they like that. They like that very much.
Deanna, go ahead.
I guess I want to reflect on that because I think it's so important. And some of that is also about inclusivity and equity. You know, that certain students tend to sort of sit in the front if it's in a physical space, and other students may gravitate towards the back. And so when you move around, you are teaching the whole group, and you're teaching them in a way that signals that those folks in the back, they're not invisible to you, that you're cognizant of them and that you care about them. And so I think that, you know, that little thing, it might mean that you have to make a plan to have one of those clip-on mics, or you have a mic that you're traveling with or something. But I think it is also an inclusively excellent practice. It's not just a way of helping to bring back a wandering mind or a student that's disengaged. It's really sending a signal that you are there for every human sitting there. The other thing, what I used to do online when I was teaching was something called square dancing, that I'd have them go into small groups. And then I would say, okay, at some point I would send a broadcast message. I'm going to actually rotate some of you to a new group. And so in the middle of the conversation, they literally would be sent to another breakout group, and then they would pick up the conversation with new folks. And I would do it until a few of the students had sort of made, because I couldn't do it with all of them, it was too confusing for them. But it was almost like they were kind of having these conversations and around, and in a way that you might do in a physical space. And I don't know why I called it. I think it was like, okay, I'm going to do-si-do, and you'll have new partners. And so that people were talking to different people, but it was as kinesthetic as I could get in a virtual space. And the students said at first it was a little bit disconcerting if they were the ones being picked to be sent to another breakout room. But I think they actually liked that in any given conversation they were talking to more folks. So I wasn't traveling, they were traveling.
Helen, go ahead. Let's take one more comment here.
I just something that Nadine was mentioned also made me realize that something I do might be connected to this. It's like, I think much less directly connected to breaking the plane, but it's a little thing that students seem to really appreciate, which is when we have a lot of in-class discussions, or, you know, think, pair, shares, or just ask a question. And I always, any student who speaks, I always ask their name. And so even though, you know, last spring there were 430 students in the class, it's not like I knew all of their names, but there were some that I did remember by the end. And so many students, even now, you know, they're so impressed. They think that they think I know all of their names somehow. And I think even though I often get it wrong, and I'll like say I'll apologize, I think it really does. I think a lot of students really appreciate that effort, even though I know it's futile. I'm not going to memorize everyone.
Thank you, Helen. James Lang also talks about remembering names, and, you know, even if it's just a few, even if students who come early or come to office hours, that it can make a difference. So I want to just move us to, I'm sorry, an hour is so short, but I also talk about maintaining student focus and attention just briefly as a second sort of theme here, because community is important as well. So maintaining student focus and attention degrades over time. I think that happens to all of us, regardless of where we are. And these renewed focus opportunities can be internal or external, but you need them to keep focusing on what's happening. Distractions don't have to come from external things. They can come from mind wandering or the phone or the laptop notifications. My dad just texted me, and I know that even though I'm in a meeting right now, right? Like we're tied to these devices, and sounds and images can come from outside the classroom. I mean, we're in different spaces, but if a truck goes by where you are, sometimes students are protesting and we hear it out the window, right? Like your distraction gets there. So attention restoration theory posits that directed attention requires this effort, that it's always voluntary, and that it's susceptible to fatigue. So the idea here is to bring in attention renewals to whatever you have planned. So it could be a break or a pause. Sometimes it's just stop talking for a moment in the middle of the lecture, and everybody hears the silence, and they like re-engage with, wait, what did I miss? Why is it quiet? Or it can also be a change in focus from the instructor. Like in this room, we've changed the focus to have other folks speaking, right? Like we had people speaking, we had the chat, we had breakout rooms. All of these things break your focus and direct you to look at something. I showed the results for the Full Everywhere survey. So for a moment, you were looking at a screen, something else, an image instead of me talking. And they can also be all our typical active learning activities like solving a problem or writing something down or recalling something. Like, what do you remember about X? But the key here is to deliberately plan your class. So at least every 10 to 15 minutes, there's a small shift happening, right? There's an opportunity to re-engage, even if it's 30 seconds of a pause, right? Even if it's write down everything you remember about energy, because we're going to start a unit on energy next, right? Like just take a moment and list everything you know about energy. That moment of refocusing them on something before they're re-engaging instead of just a new slide, a new slide, a new slide helps re-engage it. So I have 3 examples here that we discussed in some of the previous sessions, but the focusing activity. So I like this one. I often do this at least once in my class where I have students put everything away, take their laptops off their desk, put it in their bag, put their phone in their bag, no notes. We're going to listen or watch or view something. And it's going to be 5 minutes, but I want students to just really attend to it. And then they might be writing or talking about it. Often if I have a controversial opinion being espoused by a speaker, like I'll have students do that, focus on it for 5 minutes, and then reflect on what they heard. Creating something concrete like a concept map or developing an outline organization. If you can work in artwork in your class, I'm jealous, but something where they can physically create something, whether it's mentally like on a computer or physically in the classroom. Or connecting exercises. How does something in the class connect to experience you've had in their life? Connect something we learned today to something you learned in another course. That's a great way to kind of prime them with that recall. And so that kind of idea are just 3 different ways that you can think about refocusing. Let's just collect in the chat because I want to take some time with the jot recall activity. What are techniques you can use to renew your students' attention? So they could be things you're already doing or something you might like to try. Let's just collect a few in the chat. And just to set the context, it could be an assessment, but it isn't necessarily about an assessment. It doesn't mean you have to collect or grade what the students are engaging in here. You're just providing the opportunity for the mental shift. Thank you, everyone. And if you're still writing ideas, feel free to put them in the chat. So another example of this kind of activity is something called a jot recall that Dana introduced in the first session. And this idea is where you have students reflect on something they just learned. And we're going to actually do that together. The part one of this is you're going to put a word cloud. You're going to add something you've just learned to a word cloud. And then we're going to put you into breakout rooms to compare and contrast your ideas with a partner. All right. So the link is in the Google Doc, but let me find it so I can also put it in the chat. And hopefully the poll is activated. I love how colorful they make concept maps. So here we just did it with a word cloud, but you can do this with much longer things where you have students do like a free write or a drawing of something they remember. This is just because of time and because I like the pretty colors. I'll be honest, I choose activities sometimes because I like pretty colors. So I'm gonna let folks see this for a minute and then I'm gonna reopen the breakout rooms, and your prompt in the breakout rooms is to compare and contrast with each other what your jot recall ideas were, right? So you might find similar things, you might find different things, but take a moment to connect with another person. We'll open up the rooms again for 5 minutes and then we'll come back and we'll have general discussion and Q&A. Any questions before I open the rooms? All right. I'll bring you back in 5 minutes. Heather, you're now in a breakout room on your own, so don't go.
Okay, I'll stay here.
New people joined and people left, so I remixed them. Stop the share. Welcome back. I wanted to leave the last few minutes for us to have open discussion. If there are burning questions on your mind and you want to raise them, or you want to share some of the ideas that you gained. So I'm going to leave it open for what is most useful for you. I'm also going to put in the chat a link to the culmination of our Learning Sciences series, which is the December symposium event, which you can attend fully online or you can attend in person here on the Medford campus. So questions, thoughts? Go ahead, Sarah.
I just want to say thank you for this. I've done a bunch of seminars and things, and as someone who does large lectures, I've often found it hard to connect with other people who do large lectures rather than run smaller classes or seminars. So I just want to say thank you for getting us all together in a space and hearing that some of our struggles are real and getting awesome ideas from other people. So thank you for including this as a focus of teaching for those of us who do it so we don't feel so alone.
Thank you, Sarah. And the Large Lecture Consortium meets every semester. It's always open. I don't know why it's called a consortium, historic funding reasons, but like we gather large lecture faculty together every semester. Usually in the spring, we have somebody sharing something they're doing in their class. So if there's somebody who's doing something cool in their class and you want to hear from them, let me know and we'll try to organize that. All right. Well, we won't make you stay. We'll leave it open for questions if you have questions as you're leaving. And thank you all for coming today. I hope you found good ideas and made connections and all of that.
Thank you.